Hello, everybody. This is a true crime podcast from the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center team, where we talk about hybrid threats and influence tools. Today, we'll talk about sexism and misogyny in Russian propagandistic discourse and why it actually works for the domestic audience. So take a deep breath and let's go together into the woods of Russian propaganda. Sexism, misogyny, and rape culture are so deeply ingrained in Russian information space that it can be seen even on the level of international politics.
Like it or don't like it, it's your duty, my beauty.
This is actually a quote of Vladimir Putin commenting on Ukraine's duty to adhere to Minsk agreement on the background of the threat of Russian military escalation in 2022. Why would he say that? This is a reference to a song by Krasnaya Plesень, a Russian band residing in Russia-occupied Crimea. The song is about the raped Sleeping Beauty lying in a coffin. When it comes to Russian propaganda, the devil is always in the details. In Russia, sexist rhetoric can be seen on all levels, from top official statements to dumps, spreading Russian propaganda narratives via social media. Putin's public image as a leader is founded on toxically masculine traits, and Russian state-sponsored media regularly employs sexism and misogyny as propaganda tools. Promoting gender-based stereotypes, sexism, and misogyny, the Russian regime tries to belittle and devalue its enemies, Ukraine and the so-called collective West. Patriarchal values are still an important part of contemporary Russian identity, together with the promotion of traditional gender roles and the undermining of women's rights. Now, we will talk about a demonic image of gender equality in Russia. Normally, Russian propaganda puts patriarchal values in opposition to values of gender equality, trying to provoke fear of the Western otherness and maintain the status quo for traditional values in Russia. Here, sexism and misogyny are just tools used to denigrate Ukraine and its Western partners, reinforce gender roles, and belittle women's rights as ridiculous and pathetic. In such a mindset, femininity is associated with being passive and submissive, and masculinity with being active and dominant. The official Russian rhetoric supports patriarchal power structures and perceives women who challenge gender norms as a threat to security and stability. Sexualization and objectification further marginalize women from the political sphere, reinforcing gender stereotypes. Misogyny as a weapon. Since the start of the Russian-Ukrainian War in 2014, Russian propaganda has portrayed Ukraine as a weak state, comparing it to a woman, as submissive and secondary. This also was used to strengthen the narrative of Ukraine as a failed state that completely depends on its Western curators. Russian propaganda uses derogatory language, such as baba, which means a female peasant in Russian, to belittle Ukraine and promote gender stereotypes. Russia also compares Ukraine and its leaders to cheap prostitutes in order to criticize alleged corruption and venality. The government also uses toxic masculinity to sell the Russian-Ukrainian war to the domestic audience. For example, the Russian state-sponsored campaign for mobilization diminishes non-military professions and emphasizes that motherland needs only true Russian men who are ready to fight in a genocidal war in a neighboring country. Women in this paradigm are viewed as resources to restore the population for future wars. According to the old Russian principle, women will give birth to new soldiers. Beware of feminism! Fighting feminism is traditional entertainment for Russian propagandists. Certainly, this is often followed by promoting male supremacy over women. Even the intercepted conversations of Russian soldiers fighting in Ukraine show that their relatives encourage them to rape Ukrainian women. In this case, a raped woman is both a trophy for the invader and a method of war. One of the top Russian propagandists, despite being a woman, also supports patriarchal stereotypes and frames. Here is one of her famous statements.
There will come a day when we will come again to hospitable, cheerful, bright, and well-fed Kyiv. Our husbands will again turn their necks, looking at the black-browed Ukrainian girls. We will all again sing together in a tavern. We will sing What a Moonlight Night, a Ukrainian song that every Russian knows, a song from a great Soviet film about our common war, common grief, and common pride. We will once again eat local cherries and grow weary from how full of voluptuousness and bliss is the little Russian summer. In Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, the mother of Russian cities, we will read little Russian stories of the glory of Russian literature, the great Gogol, who wrote about himself. I don't know what kind of soul I have, the soul of Kokol or the Russian ones, and nothing in this proposal will cause any ridiculous disputes.
Kokol is a Russian derogative for Ukrainians. And Little Russia is a colonial name for Ukraine from the times of the Russian Empire. How cute, isn't it? The Russian government went even further and tried to stigmatize feminism as an extremist ideology. In 2023, a draft law demanding to recognize feminism as such was presented in Gosduma. The bill's justifications included claims that feminists in Ukraine and the West were against Russia and didn't support the war, while all Russian feminists were agents of the West engaging in activities that contradicted traditional values. By associating feminists with the US and Western propaganda, Moscow aims to discredit and dehumanize feminists and discredit feminism as a movement. Feminists are labeled as projects of the US State Department and even blamed for the genocide of Donbass. Such propaganda is also aimed to strengthen anti-Western sentiments in Russia, since feminism is traditionally portrayed as Western fiction. Slurs as a weapon. Sexism and slut-shaming are not only accepted but also promoted in official Russian discourse. Ukraine is often portrayed as a cheap dog whore because she is weak and has to serve her Western masters. Such an approach is used to discredit not only Ukraine as a country, but also to humiliate the Ukrainian president. For example, here is how another Russian propaganda star, Vladimir Solovyov, described Ukraine and Vladimir Zelensky.
Ukraine is becoming more and more toxic in the international arena. She fulfills her image of a woman country more and more. This is an overripe port girl with too much makeup, hysterically tearful, demanding that everyone pity her for her difficult fate while being immoral and unprincipled. The participation of Zelensky and the events means that there will be whining, begging for money, and all this is mixed with rural impudence and rudeness.
And there is another quote.
And they let me down that the Ukrainian government's turned the country Ukraine's into. Sorry for the expression, hooer.
And one more. This is a nice one.
Puppets of George Soros have come to power in the office of the president of Ukraine and are now using Zelensky as the last whore.
The same metaphors are used by Russian officials to humiliate Europe as well.
So how can you rely on the rich patrons after that? It is just a moment before they stop supporting Europe, treated like a street girl. You can, of course, decisively break up with unfaithful and dishonest sexual, sorry, economic partners and proudly start a new free personal life, building it independently. But it is unlikely that the European countries will have enough decisiveness for this, and they do not have enough testosterone.
The same language is also commonly used by the mouthpieces of Russian propaganda in Ukraine, especially in the Telegram segment, since Telegram is really popular among Ukrainians.
Everyone is tired of Ukraine, which is a toxic case for the Western establishment. There are several reasons. First of all, the Ukrainian politicians realize that and start to blackmail, which is very annoying and angering for Western politicians. On the sidelines, they compare it with the chick who you have taken out, then left, and now she shakes her license, although you have already given her a couple of bucks.
Russian propaganda relies heavily on gender-based stereotypes, machismo, and hyper-masculine values. For instance, expressions like "everyone fucked Ukraine" reinforce sex as a process of domination and humiliation, with Ukraine and the West depicted as humiliated victims. Women in politics, such as Ursula von der Leyen and Samantha Power, are often disparaged and ridiculed, described as foolish and weak. In Russia, both the government and the media broadcast the model of the world where women are passive and submissive, and men are strong and dominant. The so-called Russian traditional values, which the Russian government protects so diligently, rely on hypermasculinity, and the latter is embodied by President Putin himself. All this patriarchal garbage is used as an information weapon against Ukraine and its Western allies, and is aimed to increase support for the Russian-Ukrainian war within Russian society. Unfortunately, in Russian discourse, power and sovereignty are still associated with masculinity, so a sexist hierarchy of values and misogyny are actively used in Russian information war. In such a way, the Russian government increases anti-Ukrainian and anti-Western sentiments in society, and, as a result, it has got no time to think about collective responsibility and war crimes.